The following example is going to show us how to calculate a molecular formula. So first we're going to have to determine an empirical formula from the information given, then use our factor to determine what the molecular formula is. In this problem, experimentally, it was determined that a compound with a molecular weight equal to 181.4 grams was 39.72% carbon, 1.67% hydrogen, and 58.61% chlorine. What is its molecular formula? So we're going to use the same rules and determine an empirical formula, and we're going to assume a 100-gram sample. If this is the case, that's going to give us 39.72 grams of carbon, 1.67 grams of hydrogen, and 58.61 grams of chlorine. Now we need to convert each of these over to moles. For every 1 mole of carbon, there's 12.0 grams. So this is going to give us 3.307 moles of carbon. We have 1.67 grams of hydrogen. We need to convert that over to moles. For every 1 mole of hydrogen, we have 1.01 grams. This gives us 1.65 moles of hydrogen. Lastly, we need to convert the 58.61 grams of chlorine over to moles. For every 1 mole of chlorine, there's 35.5 grams. This gives us 1.653 moles of chlorine. Now that we have each of the moles of these components, we need to divide by the smallest number. That will be 1.65. So we need to divide all 3 of these by 1.65. This is going to give us 2 moles of carbon, 1 mole of hydrogen, and 1 mole of chlorine. That gives us an empirical formula from this data of C2H Cl. So now the next step is to determine the empirical formula weight. Because we know the molecular weight is 181.4. So if we have C2HCl, we have 2 times 12.0 grams plus 1 times 1.01 grams plus 1 times 35.5 grams. This is going to be the empirical formula weight of this particular complex. So that is going to give us 60.5 grams for our empirical formula weight. The next step is to figure out what kind of factor we have. So remember from the previous video, our factor is going to equal the molecular weight divided by the empirical formula weight. The molecular weight is given in the problem as 181.4 grams. The empirical formula weight is 60.5 grams. If we do the calculation, that gives us a factor of 3. So we're going to have to take 3 times the C2HCl, which is going to give C6H3Cl3, and this is our molecular formula. Now let's kind of recap what we've done here. We were given some experimental data. From that experimental data, we can calculate an empirical formula. If the molecular weight is greater than the empirical weight, it's going to be greater than that by a particular factor. So once we determine the empirical formula, we can use the periodic table to determine the empirical formula weight. In this case, our empirical formula was C2HCl giving an empirical formula weight of 60.5 grams. Then we take the molecular weight divided by the empirical formula weight, which gives us a factor. So we multiply the 3 times the subscripts of the C2HCl, giving us C6H3Cl3. And this is the method that you will use if you're given some data and asked to calculate a molecular formula.